The newest issue, I say newest, it's the June issue, of Christianity Today has a 4-page article on a lesson in listening. And our lesson tonight is on listening, the ears of an encourager. And I think at a certain point in the lesson, I want to dive into this and just highlight a few of the things that this author believes is important. It's a rather good article. In fact, what I might do is see if I can make some reprints of it and hand it out to those of you who'd like to have it. We are looking at the ears of an encourager. And if you remember the way that the author has the book lined out, we're in the section now about using different parts of the human anatomy to think about encouragement. Last week, Joe did the eyes of an encourager. And thank you for stepping in, Joe, to do that. I went down and participated in the summer series down at Kingston and had a good time there, but certainly missed you all here and would have loved to have been a fly on the wall listening to that lesson last week on the eyes of an encourager. But tonight we're going to be looking at the ears of an encourager. James chapter 1 and verse 19. We're not going to get into this verse and look at its context right here. I just want to bring it up for the foundation of our lesson. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. What a great verse. It's almost like there are several verses just in the book of James, like there are in the rest of the New Testament, that are almost so, what word do I want to use? They're so basic and so relationship oriented and so true to life that if you forget them, you can get into trouble. And this is one of those. And he says, to underscore how important it is, take note of this. There are a few places in Scripture where authors in different ways will say, I want you to take note of this. And this is one of those places. So if you take note of this, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And we're not going to ask for personal illustrations tonight where you failed on that verse. I think all of us have many examples in our life where we have failed on that one. So here's the direction we're going to go tonight. Listening involves determination, and we'll explain that a little bit. Listening is loving. It is a core Christian characteristic, and we'll see why. We want to look at Jesus as our example for listening. And toward the end of the lesson, there's what the author calls an anatomy lesson for encouraging listeners. And then we'll go back and look, if we have time, with the prayer of an encourager. So listening involves determination. I was talking with Joe just a moment ago and if you have ever done this, you know the truth of this. Active listening, that's the phrase I want to use. Active listening, where you are focusing on what the person is saying and you're engaged in the conversation, giving them good feedback. Active listening is very emotionally draining. Any of you experienced that? Because it's so easy to sit in front of someone acting like you're listening and it's just kind of going over your head and your mind somewhere else. That didn't take any energy. But active listening it does take a lot of energy. What we need to do is resolve to develop the skills of active listening. I didn't put any up there just because I wanted to raise this as a question. What do you think might be some good skills that you could put into practice that demonstrate active listening? What might be some of them? Yeah. And now that seems so simple, but it's pretty powerful, isn't it? I've actually noticed in counseling that, and you all have too, if you're talking with someone, when you paraphrase it in such a way that it nails what they've said and they know it. I've had people burst out in tears all because I sort of paraphrased what they said, but they knew by the way I paraphrased it, I got it. And it's amazing the power of paraphrase. That's great. Because it makes them know that you're getting it, you're understanding it, And maybe you've had this experience too. When you've paraphrased it, the person will say, "You're the only person that understands me." Well, that's probably not true, but you've been the only person to take the time and interest to paraphrase what they're saying. That's kind of what that means. So that's a great one. What's another one to develop this active listening skill? Direct eye contact. Bill, I won't put you on the spot, but have you ever been talking to someone and they won't give you direct eye contact? And you're like, now wait a minute.
It's kind of habitual today. People looking all around.
What does direct eye contact communicate? What does that say?
It connects to the two inner people. The old expression, the eyes are the door to the soul.
Yeah.
I think is very true, because what happens when you look into a person's eyes, you are connecting with them.
Yes. It's such a personal connection, eye contact. So we've got the power of paraphrase, we've got eye contact. What's another one that you can think? Oh, now let's talk about that, because that, and we chuckle at that, but I'm here to tell you, it is difficult, especially for those of us who love to talk. It is difficult to zip your mouth and listen, because guess what? You always want to jump in, and if somebody's coming, and this is especially true, if somebody's coming to you with a problem, and immediately think, oh, okay, that's no big deal. All I need to do is tell them the answer. Well, no. You need to listen. And just not say anything. I need to keep quiet. The Christian writer Henry Nouwen says this, and years ago, I didn't really realize how important it was, but he says that especially people involved in pastoral counseling and ministry and that sort of thing, when someone comes in with a problem, he says, your challenge is to sit there and let them work through it. Your job is to learn how to ask the right question. Now, that was hard for me for a number of years, because I love to give the right answer. Y'all been there? So you have to learn how to ask the right question. And then he said, and this was a huge change for me. He said, when you ask the question, don't be quick to fill the silence. He said, it's in the midst of the silence that God's Spirit can be working on the person's heart as they're thinking through the question. And I remember the first time after I read that, I thought, okay. And sure enough, within the week, somebody came to my office. And I thought, okay, I'm going to test this. So the person was giving me their problem, and of course, I kind of knew the answer, but I thought, no, I'll ask the question. So I asked the question, and I determined I wasn't going to say anything until they did first. Man, that was uncomfortable. It was silent. But what was interesting, I was watching the person, and you could almost see the wheels turning in their mind. They were working through this. And I kept saying to myself, Lord, just keep my mouth shut, because I see they're working on this. Keep my mouth shut. And sure enough, it seemed like an hour, and I'm sure it was only like 5 minutes. The person came up with the right answer themselves. I was like, well, who would have thought, And so sometimes the ability to listen and that it's okay that there's a little bit of silence if you're asking a question to get some feedback from someone. So Tommy, even though we chuckled when you said that, that is crucial, because sometimes those of us who like to talk, that's hard. That is really hard. Yeah, Joe, what's another one?
The trick is to never make a statement, but only to ask questions.
Yeah.
And to only ask open-ended questions, not yes or no type questions. But tell me more, what else? What do you think about that?
Yes.
Questions. And that way you won't make statements, you'll ask questions.
One of the neat things that I ran across, and I know you all are aware of this, but early on in my study of Jesus, it dawned on me some of his teaching was with his questions. And sometimes what surprised me, that Jesus wouldn't wait around to hear the answer that he asked. He asked the question, then he would leave. I was like, wait a minute. Didn't he want to stay around for the answer? Well, the point of asking the question was to get the person to really wrestle with it. So very, very important. The reason I spent a little bit of time on this is because this is something that is important for us. Yeah, Bill?
When people ask your opinion for something, they're really asking you to agree with them.
That's true.
Most of the time, every problem that an individual has, nobody else can solve it for them.
Yeah.
They have to solve it themselves, and you have to help them get pointed to that.
That's right. It's like and sometimes I don't think we understand how significant that is. When we're walking along somebody, as it were, helping them walk through the steps to work through a problem, the best thing that people need sometimes is someone that they trust and they confide in to bounce things off of. So that confidentiality, learn to develop these listening skills. There's something that's important with that. Sometimes, if people really want you to be the person to listen, that would determine whether or not they feel like they can trust you with the information they're sharing too. So just the whole issue of confidentiality can be important.
You may not completely understand the problem that they have. It's important for them to know that you care.
Yes. Oh, wow. What a great point. Because all of us have been in situations where we're listening to someone's problem and what they're communicating to you, and you may not say this to them, but inside you're like, I don't have a clue how to approach this. I've never experienced it. I don't know what to say. And sometimes all they need is just someone to listen. You're right. And that demonstrates that you care. So very, very good. So listening involves determination. We resolve to develop some of these skills. It appears to be easy, but it's not. You got to work at this your whole life. I think we've asked this question, but how does a poor listener make you feel? Here you are trying to tell someone something, and they're a poor listener. How many of you ever used the expression in a situation, well, what am I, chopped liver? And so you're not getting the feedback that you would like or the attention you feel like you deserve. You think, well, they just treat me like chopped liver. That's the expression people will use.
I think on average, women are probably better listeners than men are. We're problem solvers. We want to fix it. And women will sit and just let you talk and never even offer a solution. Quite often. I mean, it's not a guaranteed case, but it's a tendency.
Probably in generalities, you're true. Oh, yeah.
But women tend to talk more about their problems between themselves without ever offering a solution.
Yeah.
They just they work their problems through by talking about it.
Let me tell you one thing, and this is so funny. One time someone did something and they knew that they shouldn't have done it. So to apologize, that person came up and tapped me on the shoulder. That was that guy's apology. And I recognized it. So I thought, if you're not careful, you think, okay, that wasn't enough. They should have actually owned up what they did, whatever. But I could tell by the way the person smiled and just tapped me on the shoulder. That was their apology. I'm like, yeah, that's the way guys are. That's not the way women are. Sometimes people enjoy talking much more than listening because we're thinking what we want to say next. So because of that, you're not going to hear what the person is saying. And I love this statement in the book. Encouragers are not perfect. None of us are perfect. But we're praying that we can get more proficient at being an encourager. That it is our goal for the rest of our life. We really take seriously this idea of encouraging. And I'm not good at it yet, but I'm going to stick with it. And Lord, you're going to help me because it's so critical to my own Christian witness and light. There are 10 principles for effective, active listening. And the first one, and I found this, and I pulled these together from different resources. And Tommy, look at the first one that came up. Stop talking. When I saw him, okay, stop talking. Prepare yourself to listen, focus. Put the speaker at ease. So if someone needs to listen to you, you just learn to let the other person realize that they don't have to have all the answers. I just need for you to listen. Remove distractions. You ever tried to communicate or listen when there's all kinds of distractions, it can be really difficult. Sometimes you have to actively remove those. But learn to empathize, step in someone's shoes, verbally and imaginatively. Think of yourself. I knew of a counselor, he told me he did this a lot. He said sometimes when he was listening, it was clear that the person was not focusing on the issue at hand. So he had, in his office, he had a closet. So he'd open this door, he'd reach in and pull out these great big old tennis shoes. They were size 15 shoes. And he put them right on the table. And the person would go, why'd you put those there? Well, because you're running from the issue, so let's have you put on these shoes. The person, oh, okay. So he'd get them back to task. He said, now, that's my size. And so what he would do is he'd put on that size 15 tennis shoes. And he says, now what I want you to realize is I'm trying to walk in your shoes. I'm imagining myself walking in your shoes now. I thought that's kind of imagination, to be able to do that. And then also pull those out, let the other person realize they're trying to run from the issue. But be patient. We've talked about pauses and silences. Avoid prejudice and be impartial. Man, that's hard. I think one of the hardest things in the Christian life for each of us, and I would suspect that every one of us may be at a different point on this continuum, but to admit our own prejudices and biases and what keeps us from really hearing someone. That's a tough thing to own up to. It's much easier to say, well, they got all these problems and they're not saying it right and they've got all these issues and if they just get their life together, No, we have to be honest with ourselves. Here are my biases. Here are my prejudices. Here's what keeps me from listening the way I should. And I need to be self-aware enough to do that. Now, this is interesting. One counselor said this, and this may be where women have an advantage over guys. It's so easy to not listen to the tone of a person's voice, or as one person said, the heart language. You hear the words, but what are they really saying? Can you read between the words that you hear? Now, we use the expression read between the lines, okay? So we know what that means. Can you read between the conversation of what you're hearing? Is there something that they're trying to say that is really deeper, but they're not quite there yet? And you have to listen for that. Sometimes that's hard to do. Probably the biggest example of where I discovered the power of that, one time we were working with a church up in Michigan, and one Wednesday night after church, one of the deacons' wives came into my office pretty distraught, and she was talking about some things, and she asked a Bible question. I thought, now she knows the answer to that. And I thought, that's not really why she's here. So I asked her, I said, that's not why you're here. What's going on? She said, well, my husband and I have been having some very difficult times. And I think she said her father had just died. She had a whole lot of issues going on in her life. And she kept describing it, each step kept getting darker and darker. And I'm listening to this, and I said, you've been thinking about suicide, haven't you? How did you know? Well, you're listening between the lines, and the Lord just kind of gave me that intuition at the moment. And and we don't have time to talk about this, but just so you know this, if someone is thinking about suicide and you bring it out in the open, the myth is it'll make the person go do it. Research shows complete opposite. When you bring it out in the open, it often can be the very deterrent that keeps them from doing it. And so just a word of encouragement for you, if you ever get in a conversation like that and you're pretty sure a person's thinking about it, don't hesitate to say it. Because if a person is not thinking, they say, oh, no, I'm not thinking. And on occasions, I'll ask a person, are you thinking of it? No, I'm not thinking about that. Or on occasions when I've asked it, like, how did you know? So if you nail it, they'll let you know most of the time. As we said, listen to the ideas, not just the words. And nonverbal communication is very important. Sometimes we can misread that. I want to give you an illustration from last Wednesday night. And this is telling on me because I misread something. working all through the lesson, there was a gentleman sitting, let's see, I had the speaker stand about halfway, so there was a person sitting in the back. And through the whole lesson last Wednesday night, he sat like this and he was frowning. I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. So after services were over, a lot of good interaction with people in the auditorium, and this person was standing out on the front steps. I said, okay, Lord, I really do need to introduce myself to this person, and I really do need to interact with them because I don't know what in the world they were upset with the whole night. Shook my hand with the person, had one of the most delightful discussions I've had in a long time about, the lesson was on Jesus' scene of arrest in the Gospels, where he's betrayed by Judas and whatever. This guy had done a whole lot of historical research on Roman legions and what it must have looked like in the garden actually when those people came to get Jesus when he was betrayed by Judas. We talked for 20 minutes. He was giving me detail after detail after detail. I was astounded at what he knew. Now, I didn't ask him why he had his arms crossed and he was frowning the whole time, but I thought, Lord, I'm so sorry that I drew the conclusion just by looking at him that he was not engaged. So it's a what's the word? It's a word to the wise. It's sufficient. Sometimes, just because you see something doesn't mean you know exactly what's going on. That was his way, apparently, of processing everything he was hearing and then running it through his mind. And so I'm going to assume from now on, when I see somebody with their arms folded and they're frowning on Sunday, they're processing it. So I thought this was really good, the 10 principles for effective active listening. Listening is love. That's a neat way to say it. But why can we make this statement? Let's think about this for a minute. Listening is love. In what way? How can we even say that? Ooh. If you're thinking at least agape love, which is sacrifice of self for what's best for the other, here's what it makes you realize. Sometimes listening is a sacrifice on your part. And it can be for various reasons. But the first that comes to my mind is sacrifice of time. Have you ever been short of time and somebody wants to tell you a long story and you're wanting to say, okay, hurry up, I got to go somewhere. So you're not really listening. Sometimes listening is a sacrifice of time. The sacrifice part of it. What's another way that can make us make this claim that listening is love? Yeah, it's actually a demonstration of it, isn't it? It's one thing to say I love a person. It's quite another to demonstrate it. So listening demonstrates that love that cares. Mm-hmm. The core problem, boy, he said, in each lesson, I don't know, those of you who have your book, if you're going through it, there are times when he has statements in there that are just like, boy, hits the nail on the head. The core problem in failed communications is selfishness. Now, I know sometimes there can be unintentional miscommunication, and that's another issue. But the core problem in failed communication is selfishness. And when we don't listen, sometimes it's because we're being selfish. And we have to admit that. Yeah, Bill?
In counseling, we find this demonstrated very often. Somebody comes in and you only hear one side of the story. And it's their side. And this is where the problem is they've not focused on each other. They have only focused on themselves.
Right, that's true. Yes, if it's failed communication between two individuals, it's because the other person hasn't been willing to listen to the other person. Be a huge issue. Then he has three things I call unholy listening. He identifies self-interest, indifference and insensitivity. And surely none of us have been guilty of any of that. But self-interest, indifference, insensitivity. Wow, he really hit the nail on the head there pretty hard, hasn't he? So that what we're beginning to be aware of in this whole thing about encouragement, just from the perspective of listening, it's an exercise of getting outside of self. And that's why it's hard sometimes. It's an intentional exercise getting outside of our skin long enough that we can hear other people and care about them. Listening is love, agape listening. Sacrifice what I need to so that I can listen. We talked a little bit about that. And we've mentioned listening communicates value. He has here a statement on the rewards of good listening. And I thought, this is golden nugget time here. What are the rewards of good listening? First, cements relationships. Think about a person tonight that you consider a good friend. Probably one of the reasons that you consider them a good friend is that when you're with them, there's this good talking back and forth. And because you respect each other and you like being around each other and the communication's going, that communication you have between yourselves cements that relationship, doesn't it? It's amazing how that happens. The second, instills self-confidence, and I think what he meant by that is in the other person. That when you listen well, one of the benefits is it actually ministers to the other person. And it may be that person, and it's interesting because you're going to run into a lot of people who don't feel like they're worth being listened to. And a lot of people won't. And so it can instill self-confidence into someone that you take time to listen to them. Oh, I'm worth enough just to be able to listen to, yeah.
When they come to you to talk to you, they have a bit of trust. And when you listen well, their trust increases.
Yes, it does.
And that's self-confidence.
Yes, it does. That's an amazing way to think about that, isn't it? And that's how, if you're the one listening, if you intentionally, see, I mentioned this at the beginning, and I want to emphasize it here because this is a good point. We're thinking here in the bigger picture. How can I be a good steward of my relationships? See, Christian stewardship covers every area of life. Now, if I use the word stewardship, what are you thinking of? Money? Well, no. That's way too limited. The Christian concept of stewardship is in every area of my life. So, how am I a good steward in the relationships in my life? And tonight's lesson is learning to listen. Not only the self-confidence, but it facilitates accomplishment of worthwhile aims. In other words, with good listening, there's a lot of neat things that can happen. Have you ever had this experience happen? Because you listened to someone and what they said was right on target and you were able to do something together, you came to this realization later on, and not much later on, wow, what if I hadn't have listened to them? It's just like, oh Lord, thank you for helping me listen to them at the right moment. Now, Jesus is our example. Can you think of where Jesus modeled listening skills? Think about your repertoire of knowledge of Jesus' ministry. Can you pull something out from your memory? Where did Jesus model good listening skills? Or where did he even encourage good listening skills? Tell me about the woman at the well.
Well, she tried to explain religion to the man who was the founder of religion. And that wasn't the problem.
No.
And he changed the conversation around to what the real problem that existed.
And because he listens so well, the end of the story ends kind of neat, doesn't it? What does she do at the end of the story?
She runs and gets the people in town that come out here.
You got to hear this guy.
Everything about my life.
Yeah, and she obviously was shocked and in awe of what he was able to tell her, because she didn't know who he was. Yeah, Nancy?
When he said, "Let the little children come unto me."
Oh, yes.
Because when you listen to children, you are blessing them. And nobody takes the time to hear a little child shout.
Oh, okay.
But when you do that, that's ministry. And
It
you'll
is.
see them unfold like a flower.
Yeah. Did y'all hear that? Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." So he spent time listening to children. And as Christian adults, the more that we learn to listen to children, I think the more we're blessed. And at the same time, it helps us of course, most all of us sitting in here, parents, your grandparents, Nancy and I will soon be a grandparent. Are all of you sitting in here grandparents? I guess you all are. And Nancy and I the only one left? Not? Well, Lord willing, November 29th. So, children and grandchildren, you listen to them. And boy, do they inform and transform your life. And they have an imaginative world that is awe-inspiring. And let's see, who was it? Somebody told me recently of something their grandchild got them into, and they said, only grandchildren can get you to do things that as a sane adult you would never think of. Okay, I can remember that one. But Jesus said, let the little children come to me. Now the disciples didn't want to bother with the little children. Get them out of here. Waste of time. And like Bill said, Jesus will take a moment and teach a golden truth. And he said in the essence to his disciples, you guys have missed it, because little children of such is the kingdom of heaven. Oh, wow. And so there may be something about when we listen to children, we hear something of the purity of the kingdom that we might not gather otherwise. Bartimaeus in Mark 10:47, the blind man. He hears that Jesus is coming. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Shh, be quiet. He's not going to pay attention to you. And then the problem is, and Chris, I wish we had that scene on video, because what happens is when they tried to quiet him and go, shh, he got louder and he said it again. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Okay? And Jesus said, okay, come. And he asked the question, what is it that you want me to do for you? He asked the question and then he listened. And blind Bartimaeus, a great example of, in the Gospel of Mark, of Jesus listening to human need and responding to it. And actually that's a good definition of the Gospel of Mark for discipleship. Listening to human needs and responding. Now, we don't have the power to do what Jesus did. It'd be awesome if we could. But I think we can have just as much impact on people's lives by responding to their needs, listening, caring, and demonstrating what the kingdom is all about. Matthew 13:9, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus was all about challenging people to listen. Listen closely. Growth in faith and servant leadership roles in the life of the church begin with learning how to listen. So growth in faith, if you want to grow, you have to learn to listen. Listen to God, listen to others who are more mature, Christian examples, mentors, but then also leadership roles in the life of the church, whether you're a minister or elder, and we want to call these servant leadership roles, because it's all about service. But in order to be a true servant or minister in whatever role you're being called, you need to listen. What do people need? Sometimes we get caught up into thinking people need what I have to offer. Well, no. We need to offer what they need, and that's a whole different ballgame. A Christian characteristic, like God, we need to raise our listening skills. When we went through the book of Psalms here on Wednesday night and studied through those, it was interesting to me as I picked up on how ready God is to listen to the predicament of human beings. God made us, so he listens. There's a historical illustration in Exodus 3. Turn to Exodus 3. Then I think after that, I might dive in a minute in that article that I came across. Exodus chapter 3, if you have your Old Testaments with you. The Lord said, and of course this is Moses in the burning bush, the Lord speaking to him. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them cry out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. The Old Testament is very careful about presenting God as one who knows his people, cares about what they're going through, and is concerned about their suffering. That's a God who cares. And so out of this illustration, we get God saying this to Moses. We have an episode in Solomon, with Solomon and God in 1 Kings 9:3. Like Jesus, think of Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. This is a very important thing to ask yourself. Is what I'm about to say going to benefit this person? It has to pass that question of being beneficial. Is it really going to benefit them? Ephesians 4:29, very, very important verse. In this article, in the Christianity Today, it's called A Lesson in Listening. It starts off this way. When Tim Keller announced he would be stepping down from his New York City congregation, known for its outreach to the religiously unaffiliated, he shared his thoughts on how evangelicals could better connect with skeptics. He said, we could do a far better job of patiently listening, he told the Huffington Post, and we should not talk until we can represent the skeptic's viewpoint with empathy so that a skeptic friend says, yeah, you got it. That's my hang-up. And I couldn't have put it better myself. Only then should we try to recommend the Christian faith to them. Wow, what a lesson. Because it's so tempting to just rush in and tell a person what they ought to believe. And if they don't think that you're on the same page of understanding their hang-up, they're not going to listen to anything that you say. My son-in-law, Eric, had a coworker that was an atheist. And Eric talked a lot about learning how to listen to his friend. And there were times when I'd get these frantic emails or text messages. My friend said this, what do I say? So, we were conversation back and forth. But he said something last time we were visiting that really struck me. He said, my atheist friend has told me I'm the only person that has ever listened to him and taking him seriously. He said, and this is the phrasing that his friend used, every other Bible thumper I've ever met has tried to hit me over the head with the Bible. And he says, you're not doing that. You're taking me seriously and listening to me. And I told Eric, I said, well, what you're doing is building up credibility. And I said, what he doesn't realize is that God may be pursuing him through you. And I said, what you need to do is just keep going forward with it. Let him know that when things come up in his life, you're praying for that. And before you know it, he's going to be coming to you for advice and maybe even prayer. So be praying for Eric because he's interacting with this atheist friend. But I'm like, wow, what a great opportunity. But he's heard that from that other person. Now, in this article, this person says, make it your goal to understand the person, not try to change their mind every time you talk to them. Another guide is take genuine interest in why someone believes what they believe. And to start off the conversation, by sharing what you think is the strongest evidence for the view you disagree with. Now that's hard to do, isn't it? Because what we like to do is show everybody where they're weak in their thinking. Well, can you flip the coin over, though, and start with what you think is their strongest argument and convey that you're open to having your mind changed? And when I read that, I went, huh? Really? And I've often thought this: if we expect people to change their mind, we need to show them the kind of respect we would like to have. And we need to demonstrate an openness to discovery like we're wanting them to have. And if we can't do that, well, then don't be surprised if we're not going to get the kind of results that we want. We actually need all of that together. So, great article. James' advice about listening. Look at the context of James, the few minutes we have left. James chapter 1. This is an interesting paragraph because I read verse 19 to start off with, and I stopped at 19. I want you to hear 20 because it's the rest of the sentence. See, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, notice he doesn't say that being angry is sinful. He didn't say that. But what he's recognizing is that anger that is not processed in a healthy way, you can guarantee that it's going to produce something other than the righteousness that God's looking for in our lives. Because when you say something out of anger that you've not thought through, it can destroy a whole lot of stuff. And so that it's out of this context that we need to be quick to listen. Verse 21, therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Some people feel that because it's in this paragraph, the moral filth and evil that he's talking about has to do more with what's coming out of the mouth. You could make a case for that. Because notice, to humbly accept the word planted in you which can save you. Again, that's listening. Sometimes, and we haven't said this tonight, sometimes listening is an exercise in humility. Especially if you're not hearing what you, or you don't like what you're hearing. It's easy to shut the other person down, blame them for something, just total negative reaction. Whereas maturity and humility will make you listen. And then you have to discern, okay, now what part of this, even though I didn't like it, what part of this is true, what part of it wasn't? And to have the ability to discern between the two. And I don't know the easy answer to that. That's an ongoing process. And it seems like some settings, that's easy to do. Other settings, it's much harder to do. But that is very important. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. In the conclusion, I noticed in the book, I want to just mention these real quick. I thought this was a fascinating way to end the chapter, because he talks about listening from the perspective of an anatomy lesson. So you listen with muscle. So roll up your sleeves and get ready to invest yourself wholly in the conversation. So if you can envision yourself, this is it. I like the imagery here. When you're getting ready to listen to someone, just think of yourself rolling up your sleeves. You know, okay, we're getting ready to get to work here, and listen carefully. So it is work. Listen with your ears. Noisy distractions such as radio and television should be eliminated. I've been to visit people on occasions who said that they wanted me to come because there was some earth-shattering thing that they needed to share and be counseled with. And you're in a room where a television or a movie's blaring, and you realize nothing's ever going to get communicated unless that thing gets turned off. So you just have to politely say, you know, wouldn't it be better if we turn this off? And I've up to this point, I've never had someone say, "How rude. I don't want you to turn that off. I want us to communicate with that thing blaring." So up to this point, I've never had anyone say, "No, let's not do that." But sometimes you have to initiate that. Listen with your eyes. We've talked about that, how mastering nonverbal communication is essential for people who want to become encouragers. Listen with your lips. Use small talk or reassuring words to set people at ease when they come to speak with you. I have learned to appreciate over the years, and I'm just giving you this from my experience, the value of small talk. Now, if you only stay there, nothing will ever be accomplished. But there's tremendous value in small talk because it does set people at ease. And if you can small talk about the same thing, you can begin to have lines of communication and connection. But of course, you need to take it to the next level. But there is value in small talk. And I can remember when I started in ministry early on, I would get so frustrated at people's small talk. I'm like, man, let's just get to the issue. Well, you know, you've experienced this. The Lord has a way of working on you through the years, and you begin to realize, oh, now wait a minute. There's a different way of looking at this. There is value in small talk. And I was thrilled to see him say that. Listen with your head. In addition to the responsibility borne by each of its members, the head as a unit may also facilitate better communication. And then he says physically, like, and this is interesting, and we didn't say this. When you listen to someone, have you ever noticed the difference it makes if you kind of lean in toward them? That's nonverbal communication, but what does that communicate? It's very much interested. They're focused and they care, okay? You listen with your body, so your whole body's invested in it. Listen with your hands. Some people are great talkers with their hands. I've tried to incorporate sometimes listening to individuals with my hands, like, oh, you mean this, and I'll do a verbal, I'll do a picture in the air, you know, or whatever. And it's interesting when people watch you paraphrase if you're using their hands. That adds an additional element, which is kind of fascinating. Listen with your feet, so you stand up and greet people who want to speak to you. And then you listen, of course, with your heart. He said, apply the golden rule by being the kind of listener you would want if you were doing the talking. I thought, wow, what a great way of saying that. This entire lesson on listening, if you remember the summer that we had our 12 lessons on hospitality, and they ended up being printed in a book, one of our speakers, and I think it was Mark Brackney, I'd have to go back and look, the title of his presentation was Listening as a Form of Hospitality. Now that's a neat concept, because when we think of hospitality, we think, well, we're just going to invite people over to eat and we're being hospitable. But think of how we can expand that image. When you invite people over and you have them for a meal and they're sitting there at the table and you're enjoying all this wonderful food and fellowship and hospitality, there's a lot of good listening and communication that goes on, isn't there? So that's what makes it so special. I can't imagine inviting someone over, everybody just sat there and ate silent at the table and no communication happened. That wouldn't be much hospitality, okay? So I want to end tonight with, again, I love this encourager's prayer. To me, it's worth the price of the book. Let's end tonight as I pray the encourager's prayer. Dear Father, thank you for a new day and the opportunities it will afford me to encourage someone in your name. Thank you for helping me overcome my fears by giving me a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind. Thank you for helping me overcome discouragement by reminding me of your unlimited power and your abiding presence. Thank you for helping me live courageously and relate effectively. Teach me to use my mind to encourage others by focusing on solutions rather than complaining or assigning blame. Teach me to use my eyes to encourage others by looking for good in every person and circumstance. Teach me to use my ears to encourage others by being quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. Teach me to use my lips to encourage others by speaking words of hope and healing. Teach me to use my hands to encourage others by doing small deeds of kindness, expecting nothing in return. And today, Lord, I will help someone to build by nudging her one step closer to her dreams. Today, Lord, I will help someone to blossom by refusing to give up on him no matter how low he has fallen. Today, Lord, I will help someone to believe by showing her she's valuable, lovable, and capable. And today, Lord, I will help someone to battle by urging him to face his fears instead of running away. And today, Lord, I will glorify you through my ministry of encouragement. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen. Thank you all for being here tonight.